deserts of Egypt never sleep. When the summer sun set, the air still carried the weight of heat, thick, so heavy, impossible to escape. There were no fans, no air conditioning, no modern relief, and yet, families found ways to rest, to dream, to survive. Before we begin, if you enjoy this type of videos, feel free to support the channel with a free subscription. And tell me, where are you watching from right now? I read every comment. It's always wild to see people tuning in from all over the world. So, find a quiet place. This is Myth Night, where you can close your eyes and just listen. The sun hangs like a merciless bronze disk in the cloudless sky above ancient Egypt, its rays beating down on limestone temples and mud brick houses with an intensity that seems to drain the very life from the air. The temperature climbs past 40 degrees Celsius, past 45, reaching levels that would send modern people rushing for the nearest air-conditioned refuge. But this is summer along the Nile, 3,000 years before the invention of electric fans or cooling systems, and the people of this ancient land must find other ways to survive the brutal heat that defines their world for nearly half the year. In the narrow streets of Memphis, the shadows between buildings offer only brief respite from the sun's assault. The air shimmers with heat waves that make distant objects dance like mirages, while the packed earth beneath sandaled feet radiates warmth that penetrates even thick leather soles. Dogs seek shelter under market stalls, their tongues hanging loose as they pant in the stifling air. Even the sacred cats that roam the temple precincts move with languid slowness, conserving every ounce of energy for the cooler hours that will come with darkness. The Nile flows past the city with its usual majesty, but even its waters seem sluggish under the oppressive heat. Fishermen who normally work through the day now pull their boats to shore by mid-morning, understanding that the sun's power at its peak can be deadly to those who dare to challenge it. The riverbank, usually bustling with activity, grows quiet except for the occasional splash of someone seeking relief in the life-giving waters. In the fields beyond the city, farmers have learned to read the sky like a scroll written by the gods themselves. They know that certain clouds bring no rain, only false hope, while the position of the sun tells them exactly when work must stop if they hope to see another dawn. The irrigation channels that bring Nile water to their crops evaporate so quickly during the hottest months that they must be refilled constantly, a task that requires careful timing and tremendous endurance. This is the world where sleep becomes not just a luxury, but a survival strategy, where the simple act of finding rest in crushing heat requires wisdom passed down through generations of ancestors who learned these lessons through necessity. The people of ancient Egypt developed methods for sleeping through summer nights that were both ingenious and born from intimate knowledge of their harsh environment. Their solutions came not from advanced technology, but from careful observation of nature, clever use of available materials, and an understanding that comfort could be found even in the most challenging conditions. The wealthy and poor alike faced this same merciless opponent, though their weapons in the battle for comfortable sleep varied according to their means. In the grand palaces of pharaohs and the humble homes of craftsmen, the fundamental challenge remained the same: how to find rest when the very air seems to burn with residual heat from the day's solar assault. The solutions they developed would shape not only their sleep, but their entire way of life, creating rhythms and rituals that allowed civilization to flourish even under conditions that would challenge modern technology. As evening approaches and the sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, there's still no immediate relief from the heat. The stones of buildings, the packed earth of streets, the very walls of homes continue to radiate the accumulated warmth of the day like massive storage heaters. The temperature may drop a few degrees, but the oppressive weight of hot air remains, making every breath feel like drinking from a furnace. It's in these conditions that the ancient Egyptians would begin their preparations for what they hoped would be a restful night, employing techniques that had been refined over centuries of trial and error. But their methods went far beyond simple cooling tricks. The Egyptians understood that surviving summer heat required a complete rethinking of how life should be lived, when activities should be scheduled, and where the body could find the rest it desperately needed. Their approach was holistic, involving architecture, daily rhythms, spiritual practices, and social customs that all work together to make the unbearable somehow bearable. The houses of ancient Egypt rose from the landscape like natural extensions of the earth itself, their thick walls built from mud bricks that had been shaped by hands that understood the secrets of desert survival. These weren't just shelters thrown together for convenience, but carefully engineered structures designed to wage a constant battle against the sun's relentless heat. Every wall, every window, every design choice reflected thousands of years of accumulated wisdom about how to create livable spaces in one of the world's most challenging climates. The mud bricks themselves were marvels of ancient technology, though they might seem primitive to modern eyes. Created from Nile silt, mixed with chopped straw and dried in the sun, these bricks possessed thermal properties that modern builders often struggle to replicate. The thick walls they formed, sometimes more than 3 feet deep, created a thermal mass that absorbed heat during the day and released it slowly during the cooler night hours. This natural temperature regulation meant that the interior of a well-built Egyptian home could remain significantly cooler than the outside air, even during the hottest part of the day. The wealthy often enhanced this basic technology with limestone blocks, which provided even better insulation properties. The stone absorbed heat more slowly than brick and released it more gradually, creating interior spaces that remained relatively comfortable even when outdoor temperatures soared. The massive walls of temples and palaces weren't just displays of power and wealth. They were sophisticated climate control systems that used the thermal properties of stone to create refuges from the desert heat. Windows in Egyptian homes were kept deliberately small and positioned with careful attention to the path of the sun throughout the day. Large openings that might seem welcoming in cooler climates would have been death traps in the Egyptian summer, inviting the full force of solar radiation into living spaces. Instead, builders created narrow apertures that allowed for air circulation while minimizing the entry of direct sunlight. These windows were often placed high on walls, allowing hot air to escape upward while cooler air entered through lower openings. Many homes featured a clever system of cross ventilation that took advantage of the natural tendency of hot air to rise. Small openings near ground level allowed cooler air to enter, while larger vents near the ceiling provided escape routes for heated air. This created a gentle but constant air movement that helped prevent the stagnant conditions that could make indoor spaces unbearable. Some wealthy homes even incorporated wind catchers, architectural features that captured and directed prevailing breezes into the house, creating a form of natural air conditioning. The flat rooftops that crowned most Egyptian homes served multiple purposes, but during summer months, they became essential outdoor bedrooms. These elevated platforms caught any available breeze while providing distance from the heat radiating ground level. The roof's flat surface could be swept clean and covered with mats or light fabric to create comfortable sleeping areas that were often cooler than any indoor space. Families would migrate to their rooftops each evening, creating temporary outdoor bedrooms under the star-filled sky. Low walls or decorative screens around rooftop edges provided privacy while allowing air to flow freely. Some homes featured small structures on the roof, simple pavilions with no walls that offered protection from dew while maintaining maximum air circulation. These rooftop shelters were often oriented to catch the prevailing north wind, which provided the closest thing to natural air conditioning available in the ancient world. The interiors of Egyptian homes were designed with heat management as a primary concern. Rooms were kept deliberately dim, with small windows and thick walls that blocked most sunlight. This created cave-like environments that remained significantly cooler than the blazing world outside. Floors were often made of stone or packed earth that stayed cool even when outdoor temperatures soared, providing relief for bare feet that had endured the heat of sun-baked streets. Courtyards played crucial roles in the cooling strategies of larger homes. These open-air spaces, usually located at the center of the house, created natural chimneys that drew hot air up and out of surrounding rooms. During the hottest part of the day, courtyards might be covered with light fabric to create shaded areas where families could gather. Some courtyards featured small pools or fountains that added moisture to the air, creating cooling through evaporation. The wealthy sometimes incorporated sophisticated architectural features that modern engineers might admire. Some palaces had underground chambers that remained cool year-round, carved from rock that maintained a constant temperature regardless of surface conditions. These subterranean rooms served as refuges during the hottest days and comfortable sleeping areas during summer nights. Access was usually through narrow stairs that prevented hot air from descending into these cool sanctuaries. Storage areas for food and precious items were often built partially underground or into the thick walls themselves, creating naturally refrigerated spaces that kept perishables from spoiling in the heat. These architectural refrigerators used the thermal mass of earth and stone to maintain temperatures that were significantly lower than ambient air, allowing families to store food and water in conditions that would prevent rapid spoilage. Even modest homes incorporated intelligent design features that helped their inhabitants survive the brutal summers. Sleeping alcoves were often built into the thickest walls, creating naturally cooled spaces where bodies could rest without being overwhelmed by heat. These alcoves were typically positioned on the north side of houses, away from the sun's most intense rays, and featured ventilation systems that allowed air to circulate while maintaining the cooling benefits of thick stone or brick walls. The Egyptians understood that surviving summer heat required thinking beyond individual rooms to consider how air moved throughout entire structures. They created buildings that breathed like living organisms, with cool air entering at ground level and hot air escaping through carefully positioned upper vents. This natural circulation system worked continuously, powered by the temperature differences that the brutal sun created, turning the very heat that threatened them into the force that provided relief. When darkness finally descended over the ancient Egyptian landscape, bringing the promise of cooler air and restful sleep, families throughout the Nile Valley would begin the nightly ritual of preparing their beds. But these weren't the soft, cushioned sleeping arrangements that modern people take for granted. Egyptian beds were designed with the hot climate in mind, prioritizing air circulation and heat dissipation over mere comfort. Every element, from the frame material to the coverings, reflected centuries of experimentation with what worked best for sleeping in extreme heat. The beds themselves were often raised several feet off the ground, a design choice that served multiple practical purposes. Elevation caught any available breeze that might stir during the night, while also providing protection from scorpions, snakes, and other desert creatures that might seek the warmth of sleeping human bodies. The frames were typically made from wood, when available, or woven reeds that allowed air to circulate freely beneath and around the sleeping surface. Palm wood was particularly prized for bed construction because it remained relatively cool to the touch even during hot weather. The sleeping surface consisted not of thick mattresses, but of tightly woven reed mats or rope mesh that provided support while allowing maximum airflow. These surfaces might seem uncomfortable to modern sensibilities, but they were perfectly adapted to their environment. A thick mattress would have trapped body heat and made sleep impossible during summer nights, while the woven surfaces allowed air to circulate around the sleeper's body, carrying away heat through natural convection. Wealthier Egyptians sometimes had bed frames made from expensive woods imported from distant lands, or even frames crafted from stone that stayed cool throughout the night. Some beds featured intricate carvings that weren't just decorative, but functional, creating channels and patterns that enhanced airflow around the sleeping area. The finest beds might incorporate precious metals that helped dissipate heat, turning the bed frame itself into a cooling system. Mosquito netting served dual purposes during Egyptian summer nights. The fine fabric provided essential protection from insects that thrived in the warm, humid air near the Nile, while also creating a slight barrier that could trap and direct cooling breezes around the sleeper's body. The netting was often made from the finest linen, woven so tightly that it kept out even the smallest flying pests, while remaining porous enough to allow air circulation. Some wealthy families had netting made from silk imported from distant lands, prized not just for its luxury, but for its superior ability to provide protection while maintaining airflow. The way the netting was suspended and arranged could significantly affect a person's comfort during hot nights. Experienced Egyptian bedmakers knew how to position netting to create gentle air currents that would flow around the sleeping body, using the fabric like sails to catch and direct any available breeze. The netting might be dampened slightly with water, creating cooling through evaporation while maintaining its protective function. Pillows and headrests in ancient Egypt were designed very differently from modern sleeping accessories. Instead of soft, heat-retaining cushions, Egyptians used carved wooden or stone headrests that kept the head elevated and allowed air to circulate around the neck and skull. These headrests, often beautifully decorated with religious symbols or artistic designs, might seem uncomfortable to modern sleepers, but they served crucial functions in the hot climate. They prevented the head from sinking into heat-trapping materials and maintained an open airway that facilitated better breathing in hot, humid conditions. Some headrests incorporated curved designs that cradled the neck while providing ventilation channels that allowed air to flow around the head. The wealthy might have headrests made from ivory or exotic woods that remained cool to the touch, while common people carved theirs from local materials that were readily available. These headrests were often considered valuable possessions, passed down through families and carefully maintained because of their importance for comfortable sleep. The coverings used during hot summer nights were minimal and carefully chosen for their cooling properties. Linen sheets, woven from flax grown along the Nile, were the preferred covering material because of linen's unique ability to wick moisture away from the skin while providing a cool sensation against the body. The finest linen was woven so tightly that it felt almost silky, yet remained breathable enough to prevent overheating. Wealthy families might have multiple sets of linen bedding, allowing them to change to fresh, cool sheets during particularly hot nights. Palm leaf mats served as both mattress alternatives and cooling covers. These natural materials remained cool throughout the night and could be dampened with water to provide additional cooling through evaporation. The mats were often woven with intricate patterns that weren't just decorative, but functional, creating channels that enhanced airflow and cooling. Some families would have different mats for different seasons, with tighter weaves for cooler months and more open patterns for the hottest times of year. Cotton, when available, was sometimes used for lightweight coverings that provided minimal warmth while offering protection from insects and nighttime desert winds. However, cotton was often more expensive than linen and wasn't as effective at providing the cooling sensation that made sleep possible during the hottest nights. Most families relied on linen for their primary bedding needs, supplemented by other materials, as circumstances and wealth allowed. During the most oppressive summer nights, many Egyptians slept with no covering at all, relying on the natural cooling effects of air circulation over exposed skin. This practice required careful attention to protection from insects and nighttime predators, making the mosquito netting even more essential. Sleeping arrangements had to balance the need for cooling with practical considerations of safety and protection. Some families developed rotating systems for bed use during the hottest months, with different family members taking turns sleeping in the coolest available spaces. The most comfortable sleeping spots, usually those with the best air circulation, might be shared throughout the night, with people moving to cooler areas as they became available. This communal approach to sleeping arrangements reflected the understanding that surviving summer heat required cooperation and flexibility rather than rigid adherence to normal sleeping patterns. As the brutal heat of an Egyptian summer day slowly began to yield to evening, families throughout the Nile Valley would begin employing an arsenal of cooling techniques that had been refined over thousands of years. These weren't simple comfort measures, but essential survival strategies that made the difference between restful sleep and dangerous overheating. The Egyptians had learned to work with their environment rather than against it, using the natural properties of water, air movement, and evaporation to create cooling effects that could make unbearable nights tolerable. One of the most effective and widely used cooling methods involved dampening linen sheets and clothing with water before sleep. This technique worked on the principle of evaporative cooling. As water evaporated from the wet fabric, it absorbed heat from the surrounding air and from the person's body, creating a cooling effect that could last for hours. Families would keep large clay vessels filled with water specifically for this purpose, often adding herbs or flower petals that provided pleasant scents while the fabric dried. The process of preparing wet linens became a nightly ritual in many households. The fabric would be soaked in cool water, then wrung out until it was damp but not dripping. The degree of dampness was crucial. Too wet, and the fabric would remain uncomfortably soggy. Too dry, and the cooling effect would dissipate too quickly. Experienced Egyptian mothers developed an almost scientific understanding of how much moisture different fabrics could hold and how long the cooling effect would last under various conditions. Some families would hang dampened sheets or large pieces of linen over windows and doorways, creating natural air conditioning systems that cooled air as it passed through the wet fabric. These improvised cooling screens were particularly effective when positioned to catch the prevailing north wind, which could carry the cooled air throughout the house. The screens had to be redampened periodically throughout the night as the water evaporated, but the cooling effect was dramatic enough to make the effort worthwhile. During the most oppressive nights, people would wrap themselves in dampened linen from head to toe, creating personal cooling cocoons that provided relief for hours. This practice required skill and experience. The fabric had to be wrapped in ways that promoted air circulation while maintaining contact with the skin for maximum cooling effect. Too tight and the wrapping would trap heat, too loose and the cooling contact would be lost. The practice of sleeping outdoors became almost universal during the hottest months, as families sought relief under the star-filled desert sky. Rooftops, courtyards, and gardens became outdoor bedrooms where people could take advantage of whatever cooling breezes might stir during the night. The thermal properties of earth and stone meant that outdoor sleeping areas often remained significantly cooler than indoor spaces, which continued to radiate heat absorbed during the day. Choosing the right outdoor sleeping location required considerable knowledge and experience. Areas that had been shaded during the day remained cooler at night, while spaces that had been exposed to direct sunlight could remain uncomfortably warm well into the evening hours. Experienced outdoor sleepers knew to seek spots that would catch the north wind, avoid areas where heat-radiating walls might continue to warm the air, and position themselves to take advantage of cooling effects from nearby water sources. The Nile River itself became a massive natural cooling system that influenced sleeping strategies throughout the valley. Families who lived near the river could take advantage of the cooling effect that large bodies of water created, as the river remained significantly cooler than the surrounding land throughout the summer months. Many people would bathe in the Nile just before sleep, allowing the cool water to lower their body temperature and provide relief that could last for hours. Some families developed elaborate pre-sleep cooling rituals that involved multiple trips to the river or other water sources. They would soak their feet and hands in cool water, dampen their hair, and even submerge their entire bodies if circumstances allowed. The cooling effect was temporary but intense, providing enough relief to allow the onset of sleep before body temperature returned to normal. Clay water jars played crucial roles in Egyptian cooling strategies, serving as both water storage and natural refrigeration systems. These large pottery vessels, often buried partially in the ground or placed in shaded areas, kept water significantly cooler than the ambient air temperature. The porous nature of unglazed clay allowed slow evaporation that cooled the remaining water, creating a natural refrigeration effect that could provide cool drinking water and cooling water for other purposes throughout the hot season. Wealthy families sometimes had multiple cooling jars placed strategically around their homes, creating networks of cool water sources that could be used for drinking, dampening linens, or cooling body parts before sleep. The jars were often covered with damp cloth that enhanced the evaporative cooling effect, keeping the water inside even cooler. Some families would add herbs or flower petals to their cooling water, creating pleasant scents that added to the comfort of hot summer nights. Fans made from palm fronds or other large leaves provided another form of natural cooling, though their effectiveness required human energy to operate them. Wealthy families might have servants whose job was to fan sleeping family members throughout the night, creating artificial breezes that enhanced the natural cooling effects of other techniques. The fans had to be moved constantly to be effective, requiring dedication and endurance from those who operated them. Some ingenious Egyptians developed ways to create automatic or semi automatic fanning systems using counterweights and pulleys that could maintain air movement with minimal human intervention. These devices were rare and found primarily in the homes of the wealthy, but they demonstrated the lengths to which people would go to achieve cooling during the brutal summer months. The practice of sleeping on rooftops led to the development of specialized cooling techniques that took advantage of nighttime temperature differences and wind patterns. Experienced rooftop sleepers knew how to position their sleeping areas to catch cooling breezes while avoiding areas where rising heat from the house below might compromise comfort. They learned to predict wind patterns and adjust their sleeping positions accordingly, sometimes moving multiple times during a single night to chase the coolest available spots. Some families would create artificial shade on their rooftops using light fabric or palm fronds, providing protection from any residual heat radiation from nearby surfaces while maintaining air circulation. These temporary shelters could be adjusted throughout the night as conditions changed, allowing sleepers to optimize their comfort as temperatures and wind patterns shifted. The rhythm of life in ancient Egypt during the summer months followed patterns that were dictated not by clocks or social conventions, but by the inexorable movement of the sun across the merciless sky. Families learned to structure their entire existence around the brutal reality that certain hours of the day were simply too dangerous for normal activity, while other times offered opportunities for productivity and rest that had to be seized and maximized. This natural scheduling created a society that moved in harmony with cosmic forces, finding ways to accomplish necessary work while avoiding the deadly heat that could kill the unprepared. The day began well before dawn, often around 4 in the morning, when the air still held some of the coolness that had accumulated during the night hours. This pre-dawn period was precious time when outdoor work could be accomplished without the immediate threat of heat exhaustion. Farmers would rise in complete darkness to tend their crops, drawing water from irrigation channels and completing heavy labor before the sun made such activities impossible. The sound of work beginning before sunrise became as much a part of Egyptian summer as the heat itself. Bakers, whose ovens would become unbearable furnaces once the day's heat combined with the fire needed for bread making, would complete most of their work during these dark hours. The rhythm of bread production had to be carefully timed so that the hottest part of the baking process would be finished before the sun added its own heat to their workshops. Many bakers would prepare enough bread during the cool pre-dawn hours to last their customers through the entire day, understanding that their ovens would become unusable once the full power of the sun was unleashed. As the first hint of light appeared on the eastern horizon, a different kind of activity would begin throughout Egyptian communities. This was the time for lighter tasks that still needed to be completed before the heat became overwhelming. Women would draw water from wells and rivers, knowing that these sources would become uncomfortably warm as the day progressed. Children would be sent on errands that required the travel between buildings, taking advantage of the last hours when movement was possible without dangerous exposure to heat. The marketplace activity during these early hours was intense and focused, with vendors and customers alike understanding that they had a limited window for commerce before the heat made outdoor gathering impossible. Transactions that might take leisurely hours during cooler seasons were compressed into rapid exchanges as people hurried to complete their business. The early morning markets had an almost frantic energy as everyone tried to accomplish their shopping before retreating to whatever cool shelter they could find. By mid morning, as the sun climbed higher and its heat began to intensify noticeably, the pace of activity would start to slow dramatically. This wasn't laziness or inefficiency, but survival wisdom that had been learned through generations of experience with the Egyptian climate. People who continued normal activity levels as the temperature rose would quickly find themselves exhausted, dehydrated, and potentially in mortal danger from heat related illnesses. The concept of the midday rest, which would later be adopted by many hot climate cultures around the world, was refined to a science in ancient Egypt. This wasn't simply a nap, but a complete cessation of all non essential activity during the hours when the sun's power was at its most deadly peak. Families would retreat to the coolest areas of their homes, often underground chambers or thick walled rooms, where they would remain motionless until the worst heat had passed. During these rest hours, which typically lasted from late morning until mid afternoon, even conversation was kept to a minimum to avoid generating unnecessary body heat. People would lie still on cool surfaces, sometimes covering themselves with damp cloths, and practice a form of meditation that slowed their breathing and heart rate to reduce internal heat generation. This forced inactivity wasn't seen as lost time, but as essential preparation for the evening hours when productivity would resume. The wealthy had more options for comfortable rest during the heat of the day, with access to underground chambers, servants who could provide cooling measures, and the luxury of choosing the most comfortable available spaces. But even the poorest Egyptians understood the necessity of complete rest during peak heat hours, finding whatever shade and cool surfaces they could access. The practice was so universal that it became a fundamental part of Egyptian culture, with social and work schedules built around this necessary daily retreat from the sun. As afternoon slowly gave way to evening and the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Egyptian communities would gradually come back to life. But this reawakening wasn't immediate. The stored heat in buildings and ground surfaces meant that the temperature often remained dangerously high for several hours after the sun had passed its peak. Experienced Egyptians knew to wait for specific signs that indicated when it was safe to resume normal activity. The evening work period was often more productive than the morning hours because people were rested from their enforced midday inactivity and motivated by the need to accomplish tasks that had been postponed during the heat. This was the time for activities that required sustained energy and concentration when the heat was manageable enough to allow normal cognitive function and physical exertion. Many craft workers would do their finest, most detailed work during these evening hours when their hands were steady and their minds were clear. Social activities were concentrated almost entirely in the evening and night hours during summer months. Families would gather for meals only after the sun had set, when the heat radiating from cooking fires wouldn't add unbearably to the ambient temperature. Community meetings, religious ceremonies, and social visits all took place during the cooler hours, creating a culture that was fundamentally nocturnal during the hottest months of the year. The transition from day to night brought its own rhythms and rituals as families prepared for the cooling practices that would make sleep possible. The evening hours were when water was drawn for dampening linens, when sleeping areas were prepared on rooftops or in courtyards, and when the various cooling strategies were implemented. This preparation time was crucial for ensuring comfortable rest, and families developed elaborate routines that maximized their chances of sleeping through the hot night hours. Children's schedules were particularly adapted to the heat, with their education and play activities concentrated in the early morning and evening hours when their smaller bodies could better cope with the temperature. During the midday heat, children would join the adults in enforced rest, learning from an early age the discipline and patience required to survive in their challenging environment. This early training in heat management was considered as important as any other childhood education, preparing young people for a lifetime of successful adaptation to their climate. In the realm of sleep and dreams, ancient Egyptians discovered a world that offered not just escape from the brutal heat of summer nights, but access to divine wisdom and spiritual protection that could transform the ordeal of rest into a sacred experience. Their approach to sleep went far beyond the mere physical challenge of staying cool, encompassing elaborate spiritual practices that turned bedtime into a ritual of connection with gods and goddesses who could provide protection, guidance, and relief from the oppressive conditions that defined their summer existence. The Egyptians believed that sleep opened doorways between the world of the living and the realm of the divine, making the sleeping person vulnerable to both beneficial and harmful spiritual influences. This understanding meant that proper preparation for sleep involved not just physical cooling measures, but spiritual protection that could guard against malevolent forces while inviting positive divine intervention. The combination of extreme heat and spiritual vulnerability during sleep required careful attention to rituals that could ensure both physical comfort and spiritual safety. Dreams were considered direct communications from the gods, messages that carried important information about the future, guidance for difficult decisions, and warnings about potential dangers. During the sweltering summer months, when physical discomfort could interfere with normal sleep patterns, the Egyptians developed specific practices designed to enhance dream reception while maintaining the cooling strategies necessary for survival. These practices recognized that the gods might send their most important messages during the challenging summer nights when mortal need was greatest. Priests who specialized in dream interpretation would often undergo deliberate exposure to heat as part of their training, learning to maintain spiritual receptivity even under conditions of physical distress. They understood that the gods sometimes sent their most crucial messages during times of difficulty, and that the ability to receive and interpret dreams accurately was especially important when normal life rhythms were disrupted by extreme weather conditions. The practice of incubation sleep, where individuals would deliberately sleep in sacred spaces to receive divine dreams, took on special significance during summer months. Temples provided some of the coolest available sleeping areas, with their thick stone walls and carefully designed ventilation systems offering relief from heat while creating ideal conditions for divine communication. Pilgrims would travel great distances to sleep in temple chambers, seeking both physical comfort and spiritual guidance during the challenging summer season. Temple sleeping chambers were designed with both cooling and spiritual purposes in mind. The rooms featured stone sleeping platforms that remained cool throughout the night, while walls were decorated with religious images and hieroglyphs that were believed to enhance divine communication. Priests would burn specific incense blends that were thought to attract beneficial spiritual presences while providing pleasant aromas that could help overcome the discomfort of heat. These sacred spaces became refuges where physical and spiritual needs could be addressed simultaneously. The timing of temple sleep rituals was carefully coordinated with astronomical events and religious calendars that the Egyptians believed influenced divine communication. Certain phases of the moon were considered especially favorable for receiving prophetic dreams, while particular star configurations were thought to open channels of communication with specific deities. Summer nights offered unique opportunities for celestial observation, as the clear desert skies provided perfect conditions for tracking the movements of heavenly bodies that guided ritual timing. Personal protective amulets played crucial roles in summer sleep rituals, serving as spiritual shields that could guard against the malevolent influences that were believed to thrive in the oppressive heat. The Eye of Horus, worn close to the heart during sleep, was thought to provide divine vision that could penetrate illusions and reveal truth through dreams. Scarab beetle amulets symbolized transformation and renewal, offering hope that the suffering of summer heat would lead to spiritual growth and divine favor. Specific amulets were created for protection during sleep, often incorporating materials that had natural cooling properties. Silver was prized not just for its value, but for its ability to remain cool against the skin, while certain stones were believed to absorb heat and negative energy simultaneously. These protective ornaments were often blessed by priests and charged with specific prayers that were designed to activate during the vulnerable hours of sleep. The god Bez, depicted as a dwarf with a fierce expression and protective demeanor, was particularly important for sleep protection during summer months. Images of Bes were commonly placed near sleeping areas, as this deity was believed to frighten away demons and evil spirits that might take advantage of heat-induced weakness to attack sleeping humans. Bes was also associated with childbirth and family protection, making him especially important for households with young children who were most vulnerable to heat-related dangers. Isis, the great mother goddess whose magical powers were legendary throughout Egypt, received special veneration from those seeking relief from summer heat. Prayers to Isis often incorporated requests for cooling breezes, refreshing sleep, and protection from heat-related illnesses. The goddess was believed to have particular sympathy for mothers struggling to keep their children comfortable during brutal summer nights, and many families would maintain special shrines to Isis that were activated primarily during the hottest months. The ritual preparation of sleeping areas incorporated both practical cooling measures and spiritual protection practices. Families would sprinkle their sleeping mats with water that had been blessed by priests, creating both evaporative cooling and divine protection simultaneously. Sacred oils and perfumes were used not just for pleasant aromas, but for their believed ability to attract beneficial spiritual presences while repelling harmful influences. Specific prayers were recited before sleep during summer months, often incorporating requests for divine intervention in cooling the air, calming hot winds, and providing refreshing dreams that could offer psychological relief from physical discomfort. These prayers were typically addressed to multiple deities, recognizing that the challenge of surviving summer heat required assistance from various divine sources with different areas of expertise. The practice of group sleeping rituals became common during the most oppressive summer periods, when families and communities would gather in the coolest available spaces to share both physical resources and spiritual protection. These communal sleeping arrangements included group prayers, shared protective amulets, and collective rituals designed to create spiritual environments that could provide both cooling and divine favor for all participants. Children were taught specific bedtime prayers that were designed to provide protection during hot summer nights, often incorporating requests for cool dreams, refreshing sleep, and divine guardianship against heat-related dangers. These prayers were considered as important as any physical cooling measures, instilling in young people the understanding that survival in their challenging environment required both practical skills and spiritual resources. The belief that dreams could provide practical guidance for dealing with heat led to the development of specialized dream interpretation techniques focused on cooling and comfort. Dreams of water, wind, and shade were interpreted as divine promises of relief, while nightmares involving fire or desert heat were seen as warnings that required additional protective measures. This integration of spiritual and practical concerns created a comprehensive approach to summer survival that addressed both physical and psychological needs. The gulf between ancient Egyptian summer sleeping strategies and our modern approach to hot weather comfort represents one of the most dramatic transformations in human living conditions that history has to offer. Today, we reach for a thermostat or remote control to instantly transform our environment, adjusting temperature with the casual ease of changing a television channel. We sleep in climate-controlled rooms where the air is cooled to precise temperatures, surrounded by thick mattresses and heavy blankets that would have been impossible luxuries in the ancient world, completely insulated from the natural rhythms that once governed human rest and activity. Our modern bedrooms are marvels of environmental control that would seem like magical chambers to ancient Egyptians. Central air conditioning systems pump cooled air through every room, while ceiling fans create artificial breezes that never cease, regardless of what the wind might be doing outside our sealed windows. We sleep on thick mattresses that prioritize comfort over heat dissipation, wrapped in soft fabrics that trap our body heat in ways that would have made sleep impossible in ancient Egypt. Our pillows are designed for cushioning rather than cooling, and our bedding is chosen for its appearance and texture rather than its ability to wick away moisture and heat. The technology that keeps us comfortable during hot summer nights represents an incredible investment in energy and resources that most of the world's population throughout history could never have imagined. Air conditioning units labor constantly to remove heat and humidity from our living spaces, consuming enormous amounts of electricity to maintain artificial climates that bear no relationship to the natural conditions outside our walls. We have essentially created indoor winter environments that persist throughout the summer, allowing us to ignore seasonal rhythms that once shaped every aspect of human existence. But this technological mastery comes with costs that the ancient Egyptians never had to consider. Our dependence on artificial cooling systems makes us incredibly vulnerable to power failures, equipment breakdowns, and energy shortages that can instantly transform our comfortable homes into stifling traps. When air conditioning fails during a heat wave, Modern people often find themselves less prepared to cope with high temperatures than their ancient ancestors, having lost the knowledge and skills that made survival possible without technological assistance. The ancient Egyptians developed a resilience and adaptability that modern comfort has largely eliminated from our lives. They understood their environment intimately, reading subtle signs of changing weather conditions, knowing exactly when to seek shelter and when to emerge for activity. Their bodies were accustomed to temperature variations that would seem extreme to modern standards, while their daily rhythms followed natural patterns that maximized their ability to cope with challenging conditions. Modern sleeping patterns show little relationship to natural light cycles or temperature variations, maintained by artificial lighting and climate control that allows us to maintain the same schedule year round. We go to bed at the same time regardless of season, sleep in the same temperature controlled environment, whether it's January or July, and wake to alarm clocks rather than responding to natural cues that once regulated human rest patterns. This consistency provides convenience and comfort, but eliminates the natural adaptability that our ancestors developed through necessity. The cooling strategies that ancient Egyptians employed required active participation and constant attention, making people acutely aware of their relationship with their environment. They had to monitor weather conditions, prepare cooling materials, adjust their sleeping arrangements based on nightly conditions, and develop the physical and mental discipline needed to rest comfortably under challenging circumstances. Modern cooling systems work invisibly and automatically, requiring no knowledge, skill, or attention from the people they serve. Our modern approach to summer heat often involves complete separation from outdoor conditions, with people moving from air conditioned homes to air conditioned cars to air conditioned workplaces without ever directly experiencing the natural environment. This isolation provides immediate comfort but eliminates the gradual acclimatization that helps bodies adapt to seasonal temperature changes. Ancient Egyptians, who couldn't escape their environment, developed physiological adaptations that made them more capable of functioning in hot conditions. The materials and techniques that ancient Egyptians used for cooling were all natural and renewable, requiring no external energy sources beyond human knowledge and effort. Wet linen or clay water jars, stone sleeping platforms, and rooftop sleeping areas worked entirely through natural physical processes that consumed no fuel and produced no waste. Modern cooling systems require massive industrial infrastructure to manufacture, constant energy inputs to operate, and eventual disposal that creates environmental challenges. The social patterns that developed around ancient Egyptian cooling strategies fostered community cooperation and shared knowledge that strengthened social bonds. Families worked together to prepare cooling materials, shared the coolest sleeping spaces, and passed down essential survival knowledge through generations. Modern cooling systems promote individual comfort and privacy, allowing each person to control their personal environment without needing to cooperate with others or share resources. Ancient Egyptian attitudes toward discomfort and adaptation were fundamentally different from modern expectations of constant comfort. They understood that some degree of physical challenge was inevitable and developed mental strategies for accepting and working with difficult conditions rather than expecting them to be eliminated. Modern culture tends to view any physical discomfort as a problem to be solved through technology, creating expectations that may not always be realistic or sustainable. The ancient Egyptians' integration of spiritual practices with practical cooling strategies, provided psychological resources that helped them cope with challenging conditions. Their belief systems offered meaning and purpose that could transform physical difficulties into opportunities for spiritual growth and divine connection. Modern approaches to comfort tend to focus entirely on physical solutions, sometimes neglecting the psychological and spiritual dimensions that could help people maintain resilience and perspective during difficult circumstances. Yet our modern cooling technology has undeniably saved countless lives and improved quality of life in ways that should not be dismissed or taken for granted. Air conditioning allows elderly people and those with health conditions to survive heat waves that would have been fatal in ancient times. It enables productivity and economic activity in hot climates that would have been impossible with traditional cooling methods. It provides comfort and convenience that allows people to focus their energy and attention on pursuits beyond mere survival. The question that emerges from this comparison is not whether modern technology is superior to ancient methods. It clearly provides better immediate comfort and safety. Rather, it's whether our complete dependence on technological solutions has cost us valuable knowledge, skills, and adaptability that might serve us well in circumstances where technology fails or is unavailable. The ancient Egyptians' approach to summer heat offers insights into human resilience and ingenuity that remain relevant even in our air-conditioned age. As you settle into your climate-controlled bedroom tonight, surrounded by the gentle hum of air conditioning and the soft comfort of modern bedding, take a moment to imagine what it would be like to face an Egyptian summer night with nothing but your ingenuity, the materials around you, and the accumulated wisdom of generations who survived without any of the technological conveniences we now consider essential. Picture yourself lying on a woven reed mat under the star-filled desert sky, your skin cooled by dampened linen, your sleep protected only by mosquito netting, and the careful positioning of your bed to catch whatever breeze might stir in the hot night air. The ancient Egyptians, who developed these remarkable survival strategies, weren't superhuman or specially adapted to extreme heat. They were people much like us, with the same basic needs for rest, comfort, and protection from the elements. What they possessed, that we have largely lost, was an intimate knowledge of their environment, a willingness to work with natural forces rather than against them, and the resilience that comes from understanding that human survival sometimes requires adaptation rather than environmental control. Their solutions to the challenge of summer sleep were elegant in their simplicity and effectiveness, using readily available materials and natural processes to create comfort under seemingly impossible conditions. They transformed survival into a science, developing techniques that addressed not just the immediate need for cooling, but the psychological and spiritual dimensions of rest that are often overlooked in our modern focus on technological solutions. Perhaps most remarkably, they created a culture that found beauty and meaning in the very conditions that challenged them, integrating their cooling strategies with religious practices that transformed the necessity of coping with heat into opportunities for spiritual connection and community cooperation. Their approach suggests that human beings have far greater capacity for adaptation and resilience than our comfort-focused modern lifestyle typically demands or develops. The knowledge they accumulated over thousands of years of trial and error offers insights that remain valuable even in our age of advanced climate control technology. In a world where power failures, equipment breakdowns, and energy shortages can suddenly strip away our technological comforts, The ancient Egyptians' methods provide backup strategies that could prove essential for survival and comfort. More broadly, their example demonstrates human ingenuity and adaptability that could inspire approaches to other challenges that seem to require only technological solutions. Their story also raises questions about what we might have lost in our rush to technologically perfect our environment. The ancient Egyptians' intimate connection with natural rhythms, their understanding of seasonal adaptations, and their development of both physical and mental resilience created capabilities that modern comfort has largely eliminated from human experience. While few would voluntarily give up air conditioning to sleep like an ancient Egyptian, there's value in understanding what our ancestors accomplished and what qualities they developed in the process. So, as you drift off to sleep in your perfectly temperature controlled room, consider this gentle challenge. Could you survive one Egyptian summer night using only the methods available to our ancient predecessors? Would you have the knowledge to prepare wet linen for cooling, the skill to position your sleeping area for maximum air circulation, the patience to wait out the day's heat in enforced rest, and the wisdom to work with your environment rather than expecting to control it completely? The answer might surprise you, and the consideration might awaken an appreciation not only for modern comfort, but for the remarkable resourcefulness of the human spirit when faced with seemingly impossible challenges. The ancient Egyptians proved that human ingenuity, combined with patience and understanding of natural processes, can create solutions that are both effective and sustainable. Their legacy reminds us that comfort and survival don't always require technological complexity. Sometimes they require wisdom, adaptation, and the willingness to find harmony with forces beyond our control. Sweet dreams, and may your perfectly cooled sleep carry you into dreams of desert nights, star-filled skies, and the quiet satisfaction that comes from understanding how much the human spirit can accomplish when necessity demands innovation and resilience guides the way forward.